All right, kids, it's our next video, and this time it's on lipids, better known as like the fats and oils. Fats and oils. Yeah, the gooey things. Well, guess what? The elements involved in fats and oils or lipids are same as carbohydrates, C, H, and O, but lots of carbon and hydrogen and very little oxygen. Okay. The purpose of fats, and here's the interesting thing. If I say, why do you want fat in your body? People always go to insulate. Do you really think someone who has a lot of fat in their body says, yeah, I'm just not warm enough and I want to be fat because of that? No, fats are actually super stored energy, but it's so stored and so tight in there that it's hard to burn off. Fats are like what I call the wet log, but our purpose right now, we're going to say long-term stored energy. Now, what just passed Christmas, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, all those big eating holidays, okay? And what do we do like around those times? We gain weight. We gain weight because there's actually a primitive kind of reason for that. We gain weight because winter's coming. The harvest is done. We're finishing up the harvest and we're putting on weight for the winter, like almost like a bear puts on weight in the wintertime before it hibernates. But we know that there's not going to be much food, so we kind of like pack it on for that long-term stored energy because the carbs aren't going to be available. Remember, carbs are our first energy source. That's what we want to turn to first. Fats are for long-term stored energy. So when you're not getting the carbs, your body's going to turn to the fat. But fat is hard to burn. I call it like the dry, oh, not dry, excuse me, cross that off. It's like the wet logs that you would put on a fire. They're very hard to burn. Hard to burn. And the interesting thing about our lipids, and I'm going to get another model for you here in a second. Get it over here. The interesting thing about lipids is their monomer form. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let me get to the cell parts involved. The cell parts involved with lipids are membranes, okay? Membranes. So that includes like the cell membrane, around the cell. It includes a nuclear membrane, nuclear around the nucleus. It also includes the endoplasmic reticulum, there's a mouthful, reticulum. You would call that the ER, and that's fine if you call it ER. Golgi. And some of you might be like, I remember learning about these maybe in middle school or something like that. And even vacuoles. They all have membranes, okay? It's really the membranes that are made up of lipids, okay? Because lipids are not soluble in water, so they make these good boundaries. They make these greasy, oily boundaries around these things that prevent water from leaking out and other water from leaking in if it's not needed, okay? So the purpose is long-term stored energy. It's very hard to burn. So that's why, like, if somebody has fat on their bodies, it's there and it's hard to burn off, but it does have a lot of potential energy in there. Okay, so that's our first three things that we always say. Remember, with each category, we're going to say elements involved, the purpose, the cell parts. Then we're going to go into the monomer and polymer form. Now, look at these monomers. Here's 1, 2, 3. These are all monomers of lipids. They are big butt molecules here. Okay, they're so big that I'm not going to represent them with like little beads. Like this is one, and this is another, and this is another, and we're not going to link them up then like this. That's why I put monomer in quotes, because the monomers, these fatty acids, and by the way, the monomer is called the fatty acid. No, not what you think I was saying. The monomer form is a fatty acid. So this is a fatty acid, this is a fatty acid, this is a fatty acid. And we'll go into the difference between these three fatty acids. I'm going to represent these fatty acids with a big old marker because these are big molecules. They're big. And you're not going to see them link up like this, because if they started to link up like this, let's bring another big old fatty acid in here, right? It becomes very unstable, okay? Like this is pretty stable because they're little monomers, okay? But these big monomers, they're just too unstable and they fall apart. So fatty acids, the monomer form is usually the form that you deal with, but there are a couple of polymers out there that we will deal with. But what's the difference between this one, and this one? What's the difference between these, okay? And you can see in the structure, look at what a fatty acid is made up of. They all have, at the end here, this little group here. Okay, see this C with an OH and then this double bonded O there. This is what we call a carboxyl group. Carboxyl. It means acid, hence the name fatty acid. Okay, and then this whole part in here, this is what we call the hydrocarbon chain. I wonder why they call it hydrocarbon chain. I know you're looking at it. You're like, because it has hydrogen and carbon, Mrs. Horner. Yeah, and it looks like a big long chain, right? That's like the fatty part. Okay, that's where like a lot of the energy is stored. Not here, really. It's all in this hydrocarbon chain. But look at the hydrocarbon chain in this one, and look at the hydrocarbon chain in this one. What's the difference? Well, this one here is called a saturated fatty acid. This one's called an unsaturated fatty acid. And this one is the dreaded trans fatty acid. Okay. What's the difference with these besides the appearance of these? Well, first off, I want to say that the saturated ones, and I'm going to do like a little chart. I'm going to say saturated here, saturated. Okay. I'm going to say unsaturated in the middle column, unsaturated. And be careful when you go to do your review of these lipids, be careful. They might not be in the same order. And we're going to put trans in this column here. What's the difference between them? Okay, saturated, unsaturated, and trans. Well, let's start off with looking at the diagrams. Well, saturated, we call saturated because see, all the hydrogens are there. See how some are missing on here? So all H's there. And this one missing some H's. Okay, but this one, this is also missing them. But what's the difference between this? If you notice, these H's are on the same side. That's like what we call cis. You don't have to worry about this cis thing and this trans. But what I want you to know about this is what they do is in a trans fatty acid, they transform it. Okay, they transform it to be where it would be kinky. So we're going to say this molecule is kinky. Has kinks. This one is very straight. And this one is transformed. Transformed. Okay. Because it is missing H's. Okay. Just like the other one. But then it's like made and it's stiffened up. Okay. It's transformed to be stiff. And really, which one do you think is going to be best for your body? You don't know yet until you really kind of think about it. And I think about it in like, you know how like when you want to rip a piece of paper, do you ever like fold it back and forth? And when you fold it back and forth, when it has those kinks in it, it makes it easier to break down, right? Well, saturated fatty acids are kind of tough to break down. Let's write that down. Tough to break. But unsaturated are easy to break. So what do you think these are going to be? They kind of look kinky, but because they were like this and they were transformed like this, they're actually even stiffer. Even though it has a tiny little kink there, they're actually the toughest to break. So if you go to eat these three things, which one is going to be best for you? Well, the unsaturated are best for the diet, because they're going to be the easiest to break down. Actually, the saturated ones are not great, but not bad. We'll say in between for diets. And this one, this is bad for diets because it's been transformed, it really cannot be processed by the body well. Okay, so so where do you get these? What kind of foods are these in? Okay, what else about these? Okay, also I want to point out one more thing. We said all the H's were, and if you see, there's all single bonds in here. But see how there's a double bond here? There's double bond here. So we'll say all singles. I didn't say that right. Yeah, all singles, some doubles, and that's all single bonds. Okay, well, some double bonds. Let's cross off that S there. Some double bonds, some all single bonds, and some double bonds here too. Some double bonds here as well. Okay, but what kind of foods are these in? And what are they like at room temperature? Well, saturated ones, they're very solid at room temperature. And I want you to think of the example being butter. Butter comes from an animal, from animals. Okay, and all your saturated fats, like even if you think of bacon fat, you know how like if you actually like cook bacon, the fat kind of melts down, and then after that fat pours off, or after it sits in the pan, it solidifies again. So your solid saturated fats, they come from animals, and butter is a good example of that. Think of real butter. Real butter is very firm at room temperature. Unsaturated are liquids at room temperature. And these are things, the example I'll use is olive oil. Olive oil, a lot of people cook with olive oil because it's better. It's from plants, And by the way, since it's from plants, no cholesterol. And yet saturated ones have cholesterol. So what about then trans? Trans are solids, okay, but we're going to put the word semi-solids in front of them, okay? And an example of that is going to be your, sorry if you can't quite see this, margarine. Margarine is like a semi-solid. It's not as firm as butter, okay? But there is no cholesterol, and that's why they thought, when margarine was first developed, like back in the 50s, 1950s, okay, when it was first developed, they thought it was going to be like the answer to everything. They were going to cook in butter. They were going to use margarine. They were going to use margarine instead of butter and everything, like Crisco. Anybody use Crisco in your cookies? Well, stop it, okay? Because Crisco is a trans fat, okay? And it might say, 0 trans fats per serving. Yeah, but their serving size is like 1/4 of a teaspoon. Yeah, there would be 0 in that just about, okay? But stay away from those fake fats. Stay away from those trans fats. They're going to be very hard for your body to process. And if you're older, like, some bio teachers, you got to worry about that stuff because it can clog up your arteries and cause like a lot of heart disease. Fortunately, I worry about that, so I stay away from them. So that's it for the monomers, right? And we're going to run out of time on this video. So we're going to go to the polymers, and I'm going to stop this video, but I'm going to bring up some pictures of polymers in the next video. Okay. And the next video should be a little bit shorter. Okay. So look for the second one.